used in metabolic activities. There is no way the plant will germinate if water is not in the soil readily available for it. Oxygen also. You know, plants take out oxygen and take in carbon dioxide. So oxygen is very necessary for it. Now to the internal factors that is necessary for healthy growth of the plant. The enzymes, the vitamins and the hormones. The enzymes increases the rates of metabolic activities that occur. So when the enzyme is present, you discover that plant growth increases. Vitamins are also very necessary for the plant growth. Then the hormones, the various types of hormones, especially auxin, the ghrelins and the other type of hormones in the plant, makes growth very fast. When those hormones are not present, then the growth of the plant is retarded. So hormones are very necessary. Presence of hormones, then they should not be too much. Everything should be in moderate. All these factors that you mentioned, they are peculiar to individual plants. So when they are moderate, the plants will grow very well. The next property of cell that we'll be talking about is irritability or sensitivity. The first we talk about is the growth and development. Now we have moved to irritability or sensitivity. Irritability is another characteristic of living things that we mentioned earlier. So, and irritability is the capacity of an organism to perceive or respond to external changes or to its internal environment. The ability of a particular organism to perceive and respond to changes that occur, whether internal or external, is what is called irritability or sensitivity. For instance, when somebody enters into your room, you're the only one in the room, and somebody just entered unnoticed, pricking you with a pin, how will you react? Will you just remain there and you are just wondering? No, you shake your body and you react. That is what is called irritability. Sensitivity to changes in the external or the internal environment of an organism is called irritability. Examples of such irritability is when there is changes in cell TOGO, when there is protoplasmic movement, then when we have growth curvatures of plants, then the nervous activity of an animal, like the pinching of somebody with a pin, that's the example of the nervous activity of an animal. So those are the changes that occur, examples of changes. Such changes that is called the irritability. Examples of irritability include changes in cell TOGO, in protoplastic movement, in growth curvatures of plants, then in nervous activity of animals. Those are examples of changes that an organism can undergo. Now we talk about stimulus. Stimulus is any change in the environment of our organism pronounced enough to produce a change in the activity of a whole or part of an organism. Irritability is the capacity of an organism to respond to a stimulus. And the stimulus, defining the stimulus now, is the change, what happens in an environment that can produce a reaction, something that happens whether external or internal to the organism, that the animal or the plant can react to as a whole, or a part of the organism can react to. That's what is called stimulus. A reaction or a change in the environment of an organism that can propel the organism. That is the change that can occur in the environment of an organism, enough for that organism to notice and respond to that change. That is what is called stimulus. While response is the reaction now of the organism to the stimulus that occur. So I redefine irritability as the response or the capacity of an organism to respond to a stimulus. I've defined what stimulus is and the response, what it is all about. So irritability cannot be simply put to be the capacity of an organism to respond to a stimulus. But since I've explained what stimulus and response is, that's why I put it that way. But you can also say it's the capacity of an organism to perceive and respond to changes in the external and internal environment. The changes in the external and internal environment is called the stimulus, while the reaction of the organism to that changes is called the response. Then we have external and internal stimulus. And examples of external stimulus include light, temperature, the gravitational force, the chemical condition. Those are external. When there is change in CO2 concentration or the oxygen concentration, then that's an external stimulus. When there is presence or absence of food, the animal will respond. That's also an external stimulus. Then irritants and chemicals, that's also external stimulus. The pH and the mineral salt balance is also an external stimulus. Then examples of internal stimuli. Stimuli is the plural, while stimulus is singular. The rate of metabolism, that happens in the plants. That's an example of internal stimuli. Then we have excess or lack of nutrients. When, for instance, potassium is not in the soil, or manganese is not found there, that's an internal stimulus. Then production and accumulation of waste or toxic substances, that's also internal. Then disease condition is also internal, is an internal stimulus. Then excess or lack of oxygen, that's an internal stimuli. Then TOGO in plants is an internal stimuli. Body equilibrium is also an internal stimuli. Then sex urges or memory is also an internal stimuli. We have three types of response movements. We'll talk about response, that is the reaction to a stimuli, is what we call the response. So we have three main types of response or movements. Number one, we have the taxis, we have the trophic, and the nastic. Taxis, trophic, nastic. Those are the three main types of responses that we have. So we'll be talking more about these three types of responses. Taxis. This is the directional movement of a whole organism in response to external stimulus, such as light, water, gravity, chemical, in which the direction of movement is dictated by the direction of stimuli. The directional movement of a whole organism in response to an external stimulus. I've mentioned examples of external stimulus, and examples include light, water, gravity, chemical. So when an organism moves its whole body in response to any of these external stimulus, that's what is called taxis. And a movement can be positive or negative. When an organism moves towards the stimulus, that is, there is light in this direction, this is how the organism is growing from. Maybe the organism is growing straight, like for instance a plant now. The plant is growing straight and in a dark room. Then you introduce light. Maybe you open the window of that room and the plant is moving towards the direction of that light. That is the stimulus. The light is the stimulus. When the organism is responding, moving towards the stimulus, that's what we call positive response. But when the organism is moving away from the point of stimulus, that is what we call negative response or negative movement. Movement towards the stimulus is called positive movement, while the movement away from the stimulus is called negative movement. So example of taxis now include one, phototaxis. Photo, that is light. So response to variation in light intensity and direction is what is called phototaxis. For example, the example I just gave now, that the plant is bending towards light. That's phototaxis. Light now, the presence of light makes it photo. So that response to variation in light intensity is called phototaxis. Then we have chemotaxis. Response to variation in concentration of chemical substances is chemotaxis. Then osmotaxis. Response to variation in osmotic pressure. That's why we have it as osmotaxis. Then aerotaxis, we have response to variation in concentration of oxygen. That's aerotaxis. Then hydrotaxis, hydro tells you immediately that is water. Response of the whole organism to stimulus of water or humidity is called hydrotaxis. Then examples of taxis movements now. When, number one, movement of Iglina or Chlamydomonas towards light of high intensity. When Chlamydomonas or Iglina move towards light intensity that is high, that is a positive phototaxis. You know, light is involved, so we say it's phototaxis. But the Iglina or Chlamydomonas now moving towards that light is what makes it positive. Then another example is that when it moves away from the light intensity, we call that negative phototaxis. Another example is motile bacteria swimming from cold region to warm region when you increase the temperature, and that is thermotaxis, and it is positive because the motile bacteria is moving towards the hot or the warm region. That is positive thermotaxis. Thermo tells you heat. Then the movement of spermatozoa of moss plants towards chemical substances secreted by the egg cells. I have said that when an organism moves towards the stimuli, it is positive. So, but now we have chemotaxis because the spermatozoa of the moss plant is moving towards chemical substances. So that is a positive chemotaxis. But when the spermatozoa moves away from the chemical substance, we call it a negative chemotaxis. The second